Hello, this is Tommy Franks. Welcome to the 4-Star Leadership Podcast, product of the General Tommy Franks Leadership Institute and Museum. We're here to get a view into the lives of the legacy makers, the movers and the shakers of today. Offer insights from the full spectrum of the leadership community. We'll talk to former 4-star students and explore their leadership development path. We'll work to find out what they are about today and learn from the opportunities they've made for themselves in this world. It's my distinct pleasure to welcome you to this podcast. Remember, leaders are not born, they're developed.
Hello, and welcome to episode 41 of the Core Principles of Leadership with General Tommy Franks podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jill Green, and today our guest is Lieutenant Colonel Patrick McLaughlin. In 2021, Lieutenant Colonel Patrick Howdy McLaughlin commanded the 816 Expeditionary Airlift Squadron and led the primary airlift effort for both the Afghanistan Retrograde and Operation Allies Refuge, the largest non-combatant evacuation in Air Force history. Today, he serves as both the Wing Chief of Staff and as a C-17A Formal Training Unit Evaluator pilot assigned to the 97th Air Mobility Wing at Altus Air Force Base, Oklahoma. Colonel McLaughlin grew up in El Paso, Texas, and earned his commission from the United States Air Force Academy in June 2004. Over the past 18 years, he has accumulated more than 3,800 flying hours and 1,000 combat hours in the C-17A Globemaster III, serving in a variety of leadership roles across 6 operational flying assignments, conducting airlift operations on all 7 continents. Colonel McLaughlin's staff assignments include serving as the aide-de-camp to the Commander, 11th Air Force, and as the lead aerospace homeland defense planner for both North American Aerospace Defense Command and the United States Northern Command. Colonel McLaughlin is a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy, American Military University, Squadron Officer School, Air Command and Staff College, Joint and Coalition Warfighter School, and Air War College. He is currently transitioning to his next assignment, where he will serve as a National Defense Fellow at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University. He is married to the former Michelle Roberts, and they have 3 beautiful daughters. Before we get started with our new episode, we will have a word from one of our major sponsors, REI Oklahoma. REI Oklahoma is proud to be part of the General Tommy Franks Leadership Institute and Museum in the production and distribution of these podcasts designed to inspire leaders and difference makers. At REI Oklahoma, we have been working with small business leaders, entrepreneurs, and people who are driven to succeed for years. Highly motivated people working to own their own businesses, live in their own homes, and make the world a better place since its beginning. REI Oklahoma has continued to identify hurdles and deliver holistic solutions to create job growth and help neighborhoods thrive in both rural and urban communities. REI Oklahoma looks forward to visiting with you about helping your business and community grow. Visiting reiok.org or call 1-800-658-2823 to start the conversation.
The LaBarge family is a 4th-generation Oklahoma family. That may not sound like a long time, but our grandfathers were born here, within the Comanche Nation, before the land grants. We are the proudest sponsor of the Tommy Franks 4-Star Leadership Podcast. We hope listeners will heed the words of these distinguished men and women who have served our country at the highest level and across all walks of life.
All right, it is great to be joined today by Lieutenant Colonel McLaughlin. He is stationed at Altus Air Force Base, which is just south of us, just a little ways. So they do a lot of training for Air Force pilots at Altus. It's great to have you today, Lieutenant Colonel. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Patrick McLaughlin. I go by Howdy. It's a long story, but I'm from El Paso, Texas. I'm married to my beautiful wife, Michelle, from Dallas. I've got 3 beautiful girls. Been in the Air Force since really 2000, went to the academy, graduated in 2004. After that, went to pilot training at Laughlin, started the C-17, deployed 4 times since. I've had 6 C-17 assignments, been involved and lucky enough to be involved in some large-scale operations that helped shape my experiences in Afghanistan. But beyond that, I've had a couple of staff stints up at 11th Air Force in Alaska, as well as NORAD, where I was the lead planner for the Homeland Defense Plan for North American Aerospace Defense Command, which helps defend both Canada and the United States. And then beyond that, here the Chief of Staff of the 97th Air Mobility Wing as the formal training unit. Think of it as the driver's ed of C-17s and KC-46s and KC-135s, where we generate 70% of all mobility pilots in the world, for the United States, I should say. But we're the only one in the world that does it. So we are semi-popular, even though we're in Southwest Oklahoma. We have an incredible mission as a power projection platform that allows the nation to go do its business everywhere. So I'm coming to the end of my tour here, and I'm about to take on a National Defense Fellowship at Tufts University, where I start here in a couple of weeks. So I'm excited for that. But that's me in a nutshell.
All right. Well, thank you so much. So how did you think of the Air Force? What were the aspirations that led you to the Air Force Academy?
So growing up in El Paso, I was really close to Fort Bliss, and my dad was Army, and most of my family is Army. And growing up there, I decided I really didn't want to be in the Army. And so I started looking at other options, looking academically. I was really looking in New Mexico State. But there was a guy named Tom Watrous who kind of walked up and said, "Hey, have you ever thought about the Air Force Academy?" And I was like, "No, I'd never heard of them other than the football team." And looking into it, looking at the opportunities, seeing some movies, Top Gun, Iron Eagle, it captured my imagination. I was always interested with my grandparents that were in World War II, a lot of the stories that they had. And they always, even though they were 80, they talked about their times in service. And so I was a Boy Scout, and it just kind of fit my morals and where I wanted to do. Plus, it was nice to have a job right out of college. So that also kind of got me interested. But also, really, what fundamentally happened is I wasn't really all in on the Air Force until I went to the academy, and then it became a personal challenge to get through it. And then once I was in it, 9/11 was pretty much the biggest catalyst for me. I got in a lot of trouble my first year there because I'm not really good with authority. But in the end, 9/11 really kind of sealed the deal for me and solidified my life calling, understanding to be a part of something bigger, and more importantly, understanding that what we do matters. And I wanted to be in a job that could help correct the 9/11 situation. And so I became emotionally invested, and that became my full-time mission.
You talked several people so far. You've talked about your parents, your grandparents, people that helped you think about the path to the Air Force Academy. So what kind of leaders have helped you get to where you are?
Well, I think parents, obviously my mom and my dad, instilled a lot of strong work ethic, high moral, and really just having the courage to speak up and right is right kind of thing. Love my folks. They really instilled that from a beginning, but also a call to service to be a part of something bigger, as well as being an American, kind of patriotic values. Extended family, I have a lot of aunts, uncles, and cousins that have served in different services. I've done so with distinction, but also there's those who have aspired, not directly to pour into me as a leader, but kind of that passive leadership where, as an example, you get to look at them of what's possible, especially from a kid growing up in West Texas. You just don't know what's in the realm because you're only surrounded by those around you. And when you see a cousin that's maybe in a different state or something go off and do something great, it makes you broaden your aperture to what's possible. I'd also say just the coaches, a lot of people that in sports were a huge factor in my life to push you further than what you feel you can do. And then just in the military, you come in contact with amazing people of all ranks. I've been led by people that were 10 years younger than me. just because, again, they push you to different boundaries. But all my commanders, but fundamentally, the best leader in my life that's pushed me the most and the biggest coach I've had is my wife. And so I think that she fundamentally gets to see who I am and where I want to go. And she's pretty good at course correcting when those kind of go away from each other. But in the end, she's been there from the beginning. And I would have to say the life that we have as a leader of who I am, the image you have in your head versus who you are in reality, there's no better support advocate than your spouse.
That's kind of how I am. A lot of times when I'm talking to the students, I use my husband as an example, and I don't really mean to, but he's just the one that has, he's my guiding post. He's the one that just keeps me to where I'm supposed to be, and we're just kind of he was in the military for 18 years, and so for so long it was just kind of us, and so I think that we've just been kind of accustomed, and we've just kind of become a team where you get one, you get the other.
Well, I think leadership, the root of leadership is self-accountability, right? Because you got to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. And there is no one who will be more accountable for you
That's right.
than your spouse.
That is right. He is the first one to tell me. He just is. He's my truth point. I will just give him that. So in the military, leaders come and go, and at a very young age, leaders are put in charge of a large number of groups that may be in the civilian world that would never happen. So what has been your hardest discovery about leading people?
That there's no right answer. I think that when you grow up and you read a lot of books and you go to schools, you feel like there's some secret sauce that, you just don't know it yet, right? And one day you're going to read that right book and there's going to be this epiphany. But the bottom line is there is no right answer. There's just probably the best bad option available given the data provided. People are the best thing of our service and just in life. Engaging with other people is awesome, but they're also the biggest challenge. How dare they have their own opinions, right? And so I think that galvanizing them as a team is a challenge, but it always helps when you have a single focular point that can focus a bunch of different personalities and strong personalities to kind of move in the same direction. In the military, we call it unity of effort. Everybody can have their own piece of the pie, but if we're not moving in the same direction, we're just in chaos. And so I think as a leader, the biggest challenge is finding that one focal point that everybody can kind of galvanize around. And then more importantly, being consistent in the messaging of why what they're doing matters. Especially in the millennial generation, I would say the why is probably the most critical part. Simon Sinek, right? Start with why. But if you don't understand why you're doing it, and you can't explain it to somebody to tell them the why of what they're doing every day, especially when they have to leave their families matters, it's really hard for them to give the level of effort you're looking for.
Yes, that is so true. So throughout your career in the military, there's been changes in leadership, there's changes in policies and the views. And I mean, those come all of the time. So with all of that change, how have you been able to keep true to your character?
One, that's a really good question, especially in today's world. As a military member, General Marshall was very politically agnostic, tried to make sure that the military should be apolitical. I'm a big believer in that. Mm-hmm. But I do think, regardless of politics, right? I think as a military member or as a military leader, regardless of rank, your job is to lead with a moral compass. That's why a legal order is moral, ethical, and legal, right? And so it may be a legal thing to do, but is it the right thing to do? And I think the upholding of a certain standard, your own line in the sand, is probably for me. I know what hill I'm willing to die on, and I think you have to understand that when you make a decision, you can't necessarily make a decision worrying about what the consequences are. As a commander, you just fundamentally have to know that you're going to make the best decision that you feel with the information possible, but it could lead to your fire. But in the military, that's your job, in my mind, is you're to lead courageously. And if you're worrying about what the fallout's going to be, especially personally to your career, I don't think you're going to be an effective leader. Personally, that's just my opinion. And I think that the challenging focus of differing points of view has been seeing it from both sides of the argument. If you're going to live in an echo chamber, I don't think you're going to be an effective leader, because in the military, we are a representation of the whole country, not just the side you agree with. And so to lead everyone, you have to see it from everyone's point of view, be empathetic to that point of view, and to understand how can you motivate that individual to still have that focus point to get after the mission, right? And so I do think it's more emotional and mental than maybe in the back where it's like, do it because I said so. Again, you have to explain the why, and it requires a little more hand holding a bit. But it also requires a lot of flexibility and dexterity in your own viewpoints as a leader. Because you may fundamentally disagree with someone, but it doesn't mean that they're incorrect or wrong. They just feel differently about the same point of view. Yet you as a leader are responsible for their welfare. And so if you ostracize them because of your beliefs, then I don't think you can be an effective leader. And so I think that's the hard part, is how do you motivate everyone, regardless of their viewpoints, and then understand their viewpoints, and then find the ways that you can find that common thread, because that's really what the unit integrity is all about.
We had a speaker, and he talked about the communication aspect of it. And it wasn't just talking, it was talking about listening and understanding why people have those viewpoints that they have. And it's very important, because you can be very strong in your viewpoint as to what you think, but you don't understand that those other individuals have cultures or beliefs that they're very strong in their viewpoints as well. And so at the end of the day, we can all come to a common place, but it's how you're communicating us to getting there and a lot of times in our world, it's difficult to understand that. But
I will say, ma'am, the one thing as a military member, though, is that it's not a democracy. And at some point you can have a conversation, but the good idea cutoff line is going to be reached at one point. And as a commander, you have to make the decision.
Right.
It may not be a popular decision. And I do think you need to walk them how you got to that decision. But in the military, it's not a populist method, especially when it's things people don't want to do, like in Afghanistan, right? And so there's things that people wouldn't necessarily choose, right, if they had their druthers to do something.
Mm-hmm.
But in the military, sometimes you are forced to go against what people may feel should be the right case, but you have to be strong in your own convictions as a leader of why you're doing it.
Hello, this is Dr. Jill Green with the General Tommy Franks Leadership Institute and Museum. I would like to tell you about one of our partner sponsors, Justin Krieger. He has worked as an independent insurance agent at Krieger Insurance Agency in his hometown of Hobart, Oklahoma since 1999. Justin is honored to help with our annual Celebration of Freedom event and has served on the board of directors for the General Tommy Franks Leadership Institute and Museum for many years. He is a fifth-generation farmer and rancher in Kiowa County, where cattle, crops, and even insurance is sold with a handshake. Give him a call at 580-726-3076 or stop by the office and speak with Justin, Denise Reeves, or Wendy Block about your insurance needs. Krieger Insurance is thankful for their loyal customers and friends who have supported them through the years and look forward to earning your business as well. Justin feels honored to live in such a great country, and he is proud to be a sponsor of the Core Principles of Leadership podcast. Please enjoy the rest of this podcast experience brought to you by your friends at Krieger Insurance Agency. Yeah, and so and a lot of times in the military, that's very hard to understand, because every commander has a commander, and then that commander has a commander, and those orders are coming down from, as in your case, in Afghanistan, the withdrawal, it was coming down from the president, who was commander-in-chief, and those orders trickle down to, an airman that's only been in for a couple of months, and they have to do that mission because commander-in-chief that's their view. So,
and I will say, ma'am, absolutely. But I think that's why trust is so essential as well, because again, I don't have the context of what the president sees. I don't have a context of what every echelon between me and him are seeing. And so there has to be fundamental trust. And then you have to believe that this is a human enterprise. And even though you may agree, disagree politically, whatever, and we're not going to get into the elements of that, but I do think you have to fundamentally understand that people are coming at it with the best intentions going forward. And that has to be a fundamental aspect that it is a human enterprise, and maybe mistakes are made. That's fine. But you have to understand that their motives are righteous.
We've talked a little bit about Afghanistan. So when we're talking about Afghanistan, you and your role in the withdrawal of Afghanistan, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So I was the commander of the 816th Expeditionary Airlift Squadron out of Qatar. And so we were responsible basically for all strategic airlift, all C-7, basically big stuff leaving out of a big airplane. We were kind of dedicated to all of Air Force's Central Command. And so we basically supported the retrograde that started really kind of in May, and then started pulling out all of the major equipment out through the beginning of July. That was the retrograde. And then we had a transfer of authority in Afghanistan to the State Department in middle part of July. And with the lead federal agency being the State Department, they were the ones who kind of decided with the SIVs that had been ongoing for about a year at that point, if we remember back in the news back then. As the Taliban had felt that they had been kind of out in the wilderness, started reclaiming a lot of the provinces at the end of July, pressure started peaking on the Ghani government in Kabul. And so the State Department started working through, and we had already been planning for a thing called a NEO, which is a non-combatant evacuation operation. It basically gets a lot of innocent people out of harm's way. It's a doctrinal concept for us. The State Department is always the lead federal agency because they are the ones who say, hey, American interests are in danger and we need to get Americans out. And so they asked the Department of Defense to support them in a NEO. That order for us came down on the 12th. And we had about a day and a half of heads up, sort of. Things were already kind of in motion. As you can, I mean, we had intelligence and you can see how things are devolving. But it was very much a pickup game, just because of, if you'll read the after action report from the State Department, they'll tell you that, there was some conversations. They had to support the Ghani government. And the fear was that if we even started saying that we were planning an evacuation, that we would undermine that trust and confidence in that government. The hard side is we, as the military, we knew we were going to do a NEO. We just didn't know where we were going to go. And so that created a crisis of airlift. And so we and my team were at the end of that trying to overcome that crisis. We worked very heavily with the local units there, the 379th Air Expeditionary Wing, which was phenomenal. We had a huge team of the 621st Contingency Response Wing that actually deployed to Kabul to facilitate the actual processing of people. If you imagine a mass of 100, 200,000 people at an airport all at once, TSA is going to have some trouble. And so they acted kind of as our TSA equivalent to make sure that we were safe. We had the 8th Expeditionary Air Mobility Squadron, as well as the 5th Expeditionary Air Mobility Squadron, that were generating all of this iron. And we started, my squadron went from about 6 tails and about 80 people to 52 aircraft and about 480 people in the course of about 4 days. And me and my team, our job was to clothe, feed, and generate those missions and ensure the crews had what they needed to expedite the evacuation of Kabul at anywhere from 300 to 500 people per cargo load. We employed non-standard tactics and procedures, namely floor loading, which is instead of seats, you basically just kind of human cargo in a wave. If it spits, it ships. So they would sit down on the cargo floor. We usually get up to 5 to the record, which is 823 by Eric Cutt's crew, basically shoving humanity into an airplane for about a 3.5 hour flight down to Qatar. And then they would be processed there for onward movement to a different destination as the State Department coordinated. There was a bottleneck there at Qatar for a while as we tried to figure out on the fly where these folks were going to go. That came with its own very rigorous challenges. That's where a lot of moral injury, it's a term that we use now a lot, of where air crew felt. If you're looking at anywhere from 20 to 30 to 40-hour days from the time you wake up to the time you actually get back to bed. And you're enduring face to face with a lot of very palpable desperation from people who have endured almost weeks of being battered, trying to get just to the airfield, let alone the processing, then getting onto kind of a cattle car to get down to Qatar, and then to endure for hours 135-degree heat without water. And there's some other challenges that were there. And the crews did everything they could to help facilitate and ease that suffering. And it wore on a lot of our crews, not to mention the cumulative fatigue of being up for a day and a half, then getting 12 hours off and then going right back in to do it. That built on people for the 2.5, 17 days that we did the evacuation. In total, I think we did over 200 to right about 250 missions that successfully launched. We were launched about every 30 minutes. And my command, which really was just the six tails, we absorbed every C-17 coming our way. And so I think it was just shy of 100 tails overall. We started a stage in Kuwait. We had a little bit in Saudi Arabia, where we had some other stages because of the overflow. We couldn't fit all the iron that we had flown into Al Udeid. And so we were forced to find other locations, and that created its own challenges of command and control. I had a great team, Braden Coleman, my DO, Liam McPhail, my SEL, my senior enlisted leader, Scott Solomone, my shirt. You think of 500 people, but really it was a core of about 15 to 20 people that were really managing all this humanity, just to make sure that people just get up, go, come back, and get ready to go again. The mission itself wasn't highly complex. It's one leg there, one leg back, and then reset. But just that simplicity took 30 to 40 hours a day. The management of tails was a miracle job by Tom Reynolds and his team over at the 8th EAMS, as well as up in Kuwait with the 5th EAMS. Just keeping those jets going. Again, you're talking sandblasted, 130-degree temperatures. It's crazy. But then the threat down at Kabul was, you obviously have the Taliban that's surrounded the airfield. You have desperate civilians that are overrunning aircraft, which becomes their own threat because desperation and panic can actually hinder your operations efficiency. And that became one of our concerns. Our people you can see the video of 1109. It's on Al Jazeera every 5 minutes. But when you see that desperation where rational thought escapes the crowds, we have to defend our aircraft and we have to defend our crews to make sure that it's kind of like a drowning individual in a pool. They will drown you in an attempt to save themselves. And so we couldn't allow that to happen. Plus, every loss of aircraft, every loss of crew put the entire operation in danger. And so doing that under the guise of the world view, with every news outlet and everybody wanting to know what's happening, was an intense experience. Our crews did amazingly well. They showed initiative. They showed a lot of courage and a lot of imagination, sometimes a little too much in my book. They got a little too crafty, but they did it with humanitarian intent in mind. And so just the humanity that they showed and expressed on people that were random strangers, including women and children and elderly and people that had gunshot wounds, and just the medical miracles that they did. Every mission was a miracle, and required a lot of thought and a lot of dedication to get it done right. There were no shortcuts. It wasn't possible. But especially the ground folks, the Marines and the Army that were providing security out at Kabul, those guys were some real rock stars, especially when it got gnarly there on the 24th and 25th. But it was a very chaotic, I'll just say that. Chaotic doesn't quite, I like to say it's a 5-sense event. You saw it, you heard it, you felt it, but you also smelled it and you definitely tasted it every day. And the amount of teamwork, the pickup teamwork for thousands and thousands of people across multiple countries and an entire region. Yes, it wasn't our greatest success as far as it didn't look pretty. But the results speak for themselves. 124,000 people and change over the course of 17 days. And we didn't lose a crew. We did lose 13 service members, obviously, at Abbey Gate, which was its own story. But the courage that people did even to go get those guys, as well as the injured, and some of the heroic acts that were done there to get people back that were injured, get them to medical care so that they didn't themselves become a casualty, is something that books will be written about going forward. But that's what we did, or what my role was basically keeping the trains running on time. And then also to work up the chain to ensure that higher headquarters was aware of the challenges. Sometimes it was a calm conversation. Sometimes it was me yelling on the phone. But in the end, like I said, it's a human enterprise, and I got every bit of support from my higher echelons that I asked for at every step of the way. There was a letter. I was actually concerned in the beginning because we're basically playing with no rules in an organization that loves rules. And so I was a little concerned that our crews were going to be boxed into a corner that they would have to break a rule to make the mission go. And in the end, we found out that in the first 96 hours that the playbook's out the window. We're just making this up as we go. And the fact that our leadership, General Van Ovos, sent a letter saying that she supports the crews was kind of a tide-turning event for us because we didn't have to look over our shoulder. It was just get the job done. And so that was every phone call that I had is we support you. Everybody at every echelon is like, go get them. We're proud of you. And even when things got kind of weird on the news outlet, we definitely weren't cowed by that at all. People actually felt more free. And as a result, I firmly believe we got more people out because captains and lieutenants and staff sergeants and airmen were unleashed to go do the job. And to see that happen, everybody says, what did you do as a commander? I got out of the way as much as I possibly could. And so I had a tight-knit team that was just turning and burning. And as a result, we were able to generate aircraft at an unprecedented level. Proud of that. I'm incredibly proud of that. But it wasn't just us either. There was no one Chuck Yeager with his, throwing an ascot over his shoulder to make it happen. There was about 60 to 70 of those guys. It wasn't just one mission. There was about 400 to 500 missions. Only 200 to 300 actually went into Kabul, but there was so many others to other places to help relieve the pressure, as well as just the airmen on the flight line protecting the base from 15 to 16,000 Afghan evacuees just that are wanting to go home, and they're not exactly happy either. So, like I said, it was a full team event that required a lot of security and a lot of tactical level team building on the fly. And what was great is a lot of barriers were broke down. Nobody said, no, that's not my job. Everybody picked up a shovel and started digging. And it was a phenomenal and exhausting effort.
I can imagine. Yes.
Yes,
so,
ma'am.
and that's right. I mean, that's really when trust in your fellow team member and trust in fellow man really comes into play, is when things like that. And a lot of our leaders that we're talking to are never going to be put into those situations, but leadership just shows that it can change on the fly, and your mission or your goal can just pivot in a heartbeat, and leaders have to know and be ready to, whatever changes come, they have to be ready and trained and get their team to where it needs to be. So we just appreciate what you've done and to keep all of those individuals safe.
I will say that as a leader, things that were a surprise for me was how little of it was my operational knowledge, like how to fly an airplane, right? But it had very much to do with the mental and emotional readiness of my guys, that after they went through hell, how do you get them ready for the next one? And so the chaplain corps, I'd been in the military for 18 years at that point, and suddenly I realized, hey, I know why the chaplain corps are in the uniform, because you need those guys. Those guys are an emotional sponge, and they help people stay in the fight. And then more importantly, you have to look people in the eye, because there's such a thing as a tipping point where you want people to be motivated to go. But then you have to look at them and say, are you the best person in that situation. I understand you want to go, but you haven't slept in 5 days. You seem emotionally compromised, right? Before another 40-hour day where you yourself are becoming your own conflict. And so I think as a leader, you have to weigh those balances of risk to mission versus risk to force. And even though it means your best friend or some friends that you've helped mature and grow, you have to send them into harm's way. The mission demands it. But at the same time, you have to understand, when do they themselves become a conflict to the mission's success? And that in its own right is heart-wrenching, because you have to take someone off the flight line who is just amped and ready to roll. And so you have to make decisions that aren't personal. It's just with the grander goal in mind.
Looking back, what do you think your hardest decision as a leader has been that you've made?
I would say definitely during OAR, having not so much the first night when the overruns happened, because that's kind of having it done to you. But then the answer was, we're still going. The security was in doubt. But the order came down. It's like, we still got to go, because we're bringing in 82nd Airborne guys, and every airplane that landed only strengthened our security position. And so as a result, we had to go. And then more importantly, after having already seen on Al Jazeera and everything else that's live on CNN, what my friends and the people that that I'm leading and that I just looked them in the eyes, I know what they're going into. And then have them deliberately open their doors and expose themselves to that type of potential threat was a very difficult element, because you just don't know how it's going to play out. And that's why I look at it as like, look, there's no right answer. It's what the mission demands. And so you have to remove yourself as a human a little bit, like as a person and as a friend, and you have to look at it as the organization of, what are we trying to accomplish here? And in the end, they've made the decision, and you have to make the decision. Decision is the worst thing that could possibly happen worth that? And the answer was yes, because we're trying to get out women and children, and they're looking for a guardian angel, and that's us. And we're just dropped off a couple thousand of our bros there. So what are we going to do? Not go? That's just not an option. And so in the end, that was probably the most difficult couple of days for me, was the 15th, 16th, and 17th of August. After that, we started turning and burning, and we got into our own flow. But that was probably the most chaotic, because I just didn't know how it was going to turn out.
For when new leaders, if they're thinking of joining the military or heading off to a military academy, what advice would you give to them?
I would say you were picked for a reason. Have confidence in yourself. Be who you are. There's a little imposter syndrome sometimes, because you're joining this massive organization. You're like, well, I will never be Chuck Yeager. I'll never be whatever. You don't need to be them. You need to be you. And I would say that trust the process a little bit. Like, it's a building block approach. And so it's a wild ride. But be open to different ideas. Be open to different people. Because that's what the academies are. It's a melting pot from all over the country. And you're going to have some of the best friends and best experiences out there. And it's really the people that you're joining the service for. It isn't because of the cool planes. And don't get me wrong, that's a better bumper sticker, but it's the people that make the experience. And the types of people you engage with are at such a caliber, you're only going to improve. And whether you stay in the military for 2 minutes or 40 years, it's going to be a journey that's well spent if you invest in those relationships.
We always close our podcast by asking our guests the same question. So if you could give your 18-year-old self a piece of advice, what would it be?
I would say when I was 18, I wanted to change the world, right? I wanted to go out and do it. And I didn't know if the military would be it. But if I had to go back right now to my very, very cocky 18-year-old self, I would probably say, trust the process. There is no conspiracy. There is no secret. Like, just trust the process. You're going to be where you're supposed to be. And don't try to control every step of the way. Definitely have a plan. But sometimes the best blessings are the unintended plans. Like the 816th, I wasn't really looking to go out there. It wasn't supposed to be a big command, and serendipity and fate puts you in the right position at the right time. Sometimes you can manufacture that. Sometimes it's just, you just got to have some faith. And so I would say, going back to 18 years old, have aspirations to shoot for the moon, but don't be surprised if the unintended consequences is that you miss it and you hit London, if you want to kind of steal a line from Wernher von Braun. But in the end, I firmly believe that. I think that as long as you have high aspirations, you may not meet what your intent was in the beginning, because again, my 40-year-old self is way different than my 18-year-old self. The things that I value now are completely different than what I valued at 18. But I think it's the process of believing in yourself that you can make an impact. What I didn't know is that I didn't need to be a 4-star general to make that impact. I don't need to be the president of the United States to have an impact. You can have every impact in your community. Eagle Scouts have a huge amount of impact in their community with their projects. And they're only 15, 16-year-old kids. And so it's really just within your sphere of influence. As long as you have that motive to help people and that you want to serve and make things better, do it. And that'll be your successes, not the grand aspirations. If that makes sense.
I'm not sure I've spoken to anyone that has been on the same path that their 18-year-old self thought that they were going to be on. So, me, I'm one of them. So, but that's great advice, sir. And I appreciate your time today. And thank you for your service. And thank you for your time. And tell your wife thank you for her service, because I know she serves right along with you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for having me on, and for everything that the Institute does. Tommy Franks was a great American and is a great American, but really appreciate you doing this and providing an avenue for us to get better as leaders.
Yes, well, I appreciate your input, and good luck at your next duty station, and we'll look for great things from you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you again to REI Oklahoma for making this podcast possible. For nearly 40 years, the board, staff, patrons, and supporters of the nonprofit economic development REI Oklahoma have been committed to expanding Oklahoma's economic prosperity, earning the reputation of being one of the most comprehensive economic development organizations in the country. Business lines, training workshops, business consulting, and networking opportunities, as well as technical assistance and even commercial business space, are made available to Oklahoma entrepreneurs and small businesses. For low and moderate income individuals and families, down payment and or closing cost assistance is offered. Learn more at reiok.org. On behalf of the 4-Star Leadership with General Tommy Franks team, I'm your host, Dr. Jill Green, and this has been the Core Principles of Leadership with General Tommy Franks podcast. Now it's your turn, podcast listeners. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and let us know what you think of this episode and all our other episodes. Share this podcast with all the leaders and up-and-coming leaders in your circles. Be sure to give us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast listening platform, and don't forget to mark your calendars the last Friday of each month for another inspiring episode. So for now, as General Franks always says, go be feisty.